1/15 of a teaspoon. That's how much water the average single interaction with ChatGPT uses, according to Sam Altman, the boss of OpenAI.
Basically, if you write an email or ask some questions, if you have 10 to 50 queries, you're going to be consuming roughly 500 milliliters of water.
This calculation includes water used in cooling and electricity generation. The BBC asked OpenAI for more details about Sam Altman's estimate, but the company declined.
Welcome to The Debate. Hello, we are back here with command figures. You know, we often call it the cloud. It's this beautiful, almost poetic metaphor for the digital world.
Right. It sounds totally weightless, like water vapor just floating up there.
Exactly. It sounds completely detached from the physical constraints of the Earth.
It is brilliant marketing, honestly. I mean, it makes us feel like our data, our emails, and, our generative AI prompts just exist in this frictionless vacuum. But the reality is that every time you ask an AI to write a summary or generate an image, somewhere in the world, a physical machine drinks half a liter of fresh water.
Yeah, it's staggering.
And it burns enough energy to power a household appliance.
Exactly. When you actually step behind the curtain of AI infrastructure, that weightless metaphor just collapses entirely. You aren't looking at vapor, you are looking at concrete, steel, millions of miles of copper wire.
And massive industrial cooling towers.
Right. So today, we are examining the explosive physical infrastructure demands of artificial intelligence. And I think we have to start by looking at the chronological timeline established by the data, because the sheer scale of the shift is, it's breathtaking. Back in 2022, our global baseline for data center electricity consumption was roughly 460 terawatts hours.
Which, just to put that into perspective, was already equivalent to the entire annual electricity consumption of a country like France.
Yeah, it was already massive. But then we hit the 2024 and 2025 AI boom, the integration of generative AI into literally everything. Search engines, spreadsheets, customer service. And now, looking toward the critical 2026 projection, global demand is expected to reach 1,050 terawatt hours.
Wow.
Yeah, that is the equivalent of Japan's entire annual electricity consumption. And the projection suggests this could double again by 2030.
It is a profound structural surge in how humanity consumes energy. I mean, we are talking about a completely unprecedented physical footprint here.
Which really frames our core disagreement today. Will AI's massive physical resource demands inevitably derail global climate and water sustainability goals? Or can technological innovations, what we call green AI, and new energy strategies harmonize this growth with our environmental limits?
Right.
My position is that while we are in a pretty painful transitional crunch right now in this 2024-2025 window, AI is ultimately an intelligent toolbox. It's driving a necessary energy transition. I think we're at the dawn of an efficiency revolution that will allow AI to essentially solve its own physical footprint over the coming decade.
I come at it from a different way. I will be arguing that the sheer physics and scale of AI's growth are fundamentally incompatible with our climate targets. We just cannot wait for theoretical future fixes when the chronological data shows AI actively entrenching fossil fuels.
Right.
And it's draining critical water supplies in our immediate timeline. The environmental cost is a physical reality right now. It is not some software bug to be patched later.
I see why you think that, but let me give you a different perspective. To understand the current situation, I think we have to view this 2024-2025 energy crunch as exactly what it is, a transitional phase. We are deploying a fundamentally new computational paradigm.
A very power-hungry one.
Yes, training these massive foundational models requires an immense initial outlay of energy. But history provides a very clear blueprint for what happens next, and it's governed by Kumi's law. Much like Moore's law describes the exponential increase in computing power, Kumi's law charts the exponential improvements in the energy required per unit of computation.
But that's a historical trend, not a guarantee.
Well, historically, hardware efficiency always catches up with demand, and we are already seeing the timeline of green AI optimization taking hold right now.
But green AI optimization is mostly theoretical at the scale we are talking about. You are talking about software tweaks offsetting the power demands of millions of new microchips.
I wouldn't call them just theoretical tweaks. Let's look at the mechanics of it. Take model quantization, for example. Right now, when an AI does math, it uses highly precise 32-bit floating point numbers. It takes a lot of physical electricity to move that heavy, complex data through a microchip.
Sure.
But quantization compresses the model to use 8-bit integers. To use an analogy, it's like swapping out a heavy multi-tool Swiss Army knife for a single scalpel. It accomplishes the exact same task, but it takes significantly less physical electricity to move that smaller piece of data around.
Okay, but
And just to add to that, we have knowledge distillation. That's where a massive, power-hungry model trains a smaller, hyper-efficient model. We are seeing small language models, or SLMs, being deployed today that reduce inference energy consumption by 60 to 90%. And that's without sacrificing practical performance. So looking toward 2026 and 2030, the software is becoming drastically more efficient.
the fundamental flaw in relying on Kumi's law and these software efficiencies to save us is that it completely ignores human behavior. Specifically, it ignores the Jevons paradox.
The idea that increased efficiency just leads to increased consumption.
Exactly. William Stanley Jevons observed back in the 19th century that making a steam engine burn coal more efficiently didn't decrease coal use. It actually caused coal consumption to skyrocket.
Because it became cheaper to use.
Right. Because it made the steam engine profitable to use everywhere. The exact same mechanism applies to AI. Yes, you can quantize a model and make it 60% more efficient, but what actually happens? You don't save that energy. You just embed that cheaper AI into billions of everyday applications.
But it does democratize the access.
But it goes into every smartphone, every web search, every smart refrigerator. By 2025, the data shows that AI inference, the day-to-day brain power required every time a user hits enter, has risen to account for 75 to 80% of total AI power use.
Right.
A single query still takes about 10 times the electricity of a traditional Google search. So when you multiply a slightly more efficient model by 10 billion queries a day, you still have an exponentially growing power draw.
But that assumes the power draw cannot be managed by the grid.
It can't. We have to stop treating AI as lightweight software and recognize it as heavy physical infrastructure. Look at the chronological baseline we established earlier. In 2023, data centers consumed 26% of all electricity in the state of Virginia.
Virginia is a massive hub, yes.
Over a quarter of a major American state's power going to servers. Think about that. And Ireland forecasts that by 2026, 32% of its national electricity will go to data centers. You simply cannot optimize your way out of that level of absolute physical demand.
Let's focus on that 2026 horizon, because I agree that is where the anxiety about grid stress really peaks. Reaching that 1,050 terawatt-hour demand projection is an enormous structural challenge. But look at how the hyperscalers, the major tech companies building these data centers, are responding. They aren't just passively draining the grid, they're actively financing its decarbonization.
Financing decarbonization in the long run doesn't solve the reality of 2026, though. To meet that 1,050 terawatt-hour demand, tech companies cannot wait for wind and solar farms to be permitted, built, and connected. The generative AI boom is happening right now.
So what are you seeing as the actual response?
Obsolete fossil fuel peaker plants are being forced back into service. In the United States alone, gas-powered data center projects currently in development could emit an additional 129 million tons of greenhouse gases. The industry is pushing this narrative of the power couple.
Right, using natural gas to balance renewables.
Yes, the idea that you can use natural gas turbines to balance the intermittency of renewables specifically for data centers, but it's a transition myth. It permanently entrenches fossil fuel infrastructure. If you build a gas plant today to power a data center, it will operate for the next 30 years. That effectively sabotages any hope of meeting our net zero targets.
That's an interesting point, though I would frame it differently. If AI data centers can flexibly adjust their power use in near real time, can't they act as a balancing mechanism for the grid rather than just a drain on it?
How so?
Well, if we look strictly at the post-2026 timeline, the market is shifting radically. AI data centers are unique because their workloads can be flexible. We have data from trials showing that hyperscalers can dynamically reduce their consumption. If the grid is stressed during peak evening hours, a data center can scale back its heavy training workloads or shift them to a totally different time zone.
That assumes they are willing to delay processing.
Which they often are for training runs. But more importantly, looking toward 2030, we are seeing a nuclear renaissance directly catalyzed by AI.
Nuclear power is incredibly slow to deploy, though.
It is, but AI is providing the guaranteed capital required to change that. Wind and solar are intermittent, but an AI data center requires 24/7 firm power. That absolute necessity is why we are seeing massive, unprecedented investments in zero-carbon baseloads.
You mean the reactor restarts?
Exactly. It's the reason hyperscalers are signing agreements to help restart the 3 Mile Island and Duane Arnold's nuclear reactors by 2028. It is why we are seeing billions of dollars poured into small modular reactors, or SMRs, for the 2030s. Without the massive guaranteed power purchase agreements from AI companies, that zero-carbon nuclear industry just remains dormant. AI is actually the financial catalyst for a clean energy future.
A catalyst for the 2030s does not erase the emissions of the 2020s. Restarts like 3 Mile Island take years of regulatory hurdles, and SMRs have been, a decade away for the last 20 years. They won't be commercially viable at the scale AI needs until well into the 2030s. Meanwhile, the emissions are happening today.
That's a fair point on the timeline.
And it isn't just carbon we should be worried about. We need to shift our timeline focus to the immediate localized crises of 2024 and 2025, specifically the water AI nexus.
The cooling requirements.
Exactly. These high-performance AI servers run incredibly hot. Keeping them cool requires immense, staggering volumes of water. The research indicates that a system like ChatGPT consumes about 500 milliliters of fresh water for every 10 to 50 responses it generates.
Just to clarify, that's half a liter for a handful of prompts.
Right. And when you scale that to hundreds of millions of daily users, you create localized environmental disasters. Take Google's Mesa data center in Arizona as a prime example. They hold a permit for 5.5 million cubic meters of water annually in a region that is highly prone to severe drought.
Yeah, Arizona is definitely water stressed.
That is enough water to meet the basic annual needs of hundreds of thousands of people. We are actively prioritizing server cooling over municipal water security.
I understand the severity of the Mesa example, but I am not entirely convinced by that line of reasoning, because it assumes cooling technology is static, and the chronological evolution of the hardware tells a very different story. Yes, the legacy air cooling systems you are referring to rely heavily on evaporative cooling towers.
Which evaporate millions of gallons of water.
Right, this is what we call Scope 1 water use, where fresh water is evaporated directly into the atmosphere on site to dissipate heat. But the industry is rapidly, aggressively moving away from that.
Moving toward what? Because physics dictates that heat has to go somewhere.
It goes into liquid, but not through evaporation. We are transitioning to direct-to-chip liquid cooling and dielectric immersion cooling. Look at what KDDI is currently trialing in Japan. They are fully submerging servers in specialized dielectric fluids.
So non-conductive liquids.
Exactly. Liquids that absorb the heat efficiently without short-circuiting the electronics. Or look at the next-generation hardware being rolled out right now, like NVIDIA's Blackwell platform. It is designed around closed-loop liquid cooling. The liquid absorbs the heat, runs through a heat exchanger, and recirculates without evaporating away.
Okay, but
These closed-loop designs bring on-site water evaporation essentially down to zero. So by the time we hit the 2030 projections, we are looking at fundamentally decoupling AI computation from local water stress.
That is a compelling argument for on-site efficiency, sure, but it completely ignores the mechanics of Scope 2 water consumption.
You mean the water used by the power grid itself?
Precisely. Even if you miraculously outfit every single data center on Earth with closed-loop immersion cooling tomorrow, you have only solved the Scope 1 on-site water use. You haven't addressed the Scope 2 water use. That is the massive amount of water consumed indirectly by the power plants, generating the electricity for those incredibly power-hungry servers.
Well, thermoelectric plants do use a lot of water.
They do. Whether they burn coal, gas, or even the nuclear plants you championed earlier, they all operate by boiling water to create steam to spin turbines. Furthermore, they use billions of gallons of water to cool their own systems. Because AI requires such a vast amount of electricity, the indirect Scope 2 water footprint often equals or even exceeds the direct on-site cooling footprint.
I see what you're saying.
You cannot separate the energy crisis from the water crisis. They are the exact same physical problem. Every time you pull a megawatt of power from the grid, you are evaporating water miles away at the power plant.
Which brings us directly back to why the transition to renewable energy is the ultimate solution here. Solar photovoltaics and wind turbines consume virtually zero water to generate electricity. This is exactly why the major AI companies are investing so heavily in renewable energy portfolios. It solves both the carbon footprint and the Scope 2 water footprint simultaneously.
But we have to ask, where are they investing and who is paying the price for the transition? This brings us to the geographic and socioeconomic reality of the current timeline. I call it the greenwashing loop. Let's look at the African continent as a prime example of this disparity.
Okay.
You have these massive tech firms publishing beautiful, highly produced corporate sustainability reports, but where are those reports actually hosted? Often on servers in South Africa, where 82% of the national grid is powered by highly polluting coal, or in Nigeria, where chronic grid instability means data centers often run almost entirely unlocalized diesel generators.
But those tech companies purchase renewable energy certificates to offset that footprint.
That is exactly the greenwashing loop. They buy a renewable energy certificate, which is essentially a financial instrument. It's a piece of paper that says they funded clean energy somewhere else in the world, maybe a solar farm in Texas. And then they proudly claim their African AI operations are carbon neutral.
Right, it offsets the global total.
But a certificate does not change the physical reality of the carbon-intensive grids they actually operate on. The local populations in South Africa or Nigeria are the ones breathing the diesel fumes and dealing with the coal ash, while the corporation in another hemisphere claims zero emissions.
I acknowledge those geographic disparities exist today, but I would argue that AI infrastructure by its very nature can be strategically deployed to solve this exact problem. Unlike a traditional manufacturing plant that has to be located near its raw materials or shipping ports, data can travel at the speed of light. As we move into 2026, we are seeing a major trend of shifting compute workloads to regions operating on excess renewable energy. The industry calls it chasing the sun or chasing the wind.
Shifting the workloads dynamically across the globe.
Exactly. If there is abundant excess wind power in the North Sea at midnight, you route your heavy AI training batch processes to servers there. Or look at the specific developments in Kenya. Kenya has massive, untapped geothermal energy in the Naivasha zone. Microsoft and G42 are planning a 100-megawatt data center specifically to leverage that non-intermittent clean power supply.
Right, but AI's ability to hunt for clean energy globally provides the anchor tenancy, that guaranteed long-term revenue needed to incentivize renewable grid build-outs in developing nations.
I'm sorry, but I just don't buy that. Let me tell you why. If a massive multinational data center drops into Kenya and buys up 100 megawatts of local geothermal power, aren't they just cannibalizing the clean energy meant for local citizens?
I wouldn't say cannibalizing, but that clean geothermal power was supposed to help decarbonize the local economy. It was supposed to provide reliable electricity to local hospitals, schools, and businesses to raise the standard of living. Instead, a tech giant buys it all up for AI inference workloads that are predominantly serving users in North America and Europe.
Well,
The local grid, now starved of its own clean geothermal capacity, is forced to fall back on fossil fuels to keep the lights on for its citizens. It is a modern form of digital resource extraction.
We are literally prioritizing artificial intelligence over basic human development and local energy security.
I see the concern, but that assumes a zero-sum game where the total amount of available geothermal power is fixed and we are just arguing over who gets to use it. The physical reality of the grid is that building power infrastructure requires massive upfront capital. By signing long-term 20-year power purchase agreements, these data centers make it economically viable for developers to build brand new geothermal plants that otherwise would never have secured the financing to exist. They are expanding the pie, not just taking a slice of it.
They are expanding the pie, but they are eating the entire expansion themselves, leaving the local grid exactly where it started, or worse, dealing with the local Scope 1 water demands of that new data center.
But as we look toward the conclusion of this timeline, summarizing where we stand heading into 2030, I firmly believe the trajectory supports optimism. I fully concede that the 2024 to 2026 window presents acute, painful scaling challenges.
Very painful.
But the data shows an industry rapidly innovating out of its own footprint. Between green AI software efficiencies reducing inference loads by up to 90%, and the deployment of closed-loop liquid cooling fundamentally decoupling computing from local water stress, and the fact that AI is catalyzing a genuine nuclear and renewable energy renaissance globally, the technology will ultimately be a net positive for our climate goals. AI is the intelligent toolbox we desperately need to manage our increasingly complex global energy grids and accelerate scientific discovery in material science and climatology.
And my conclusion remains rooted in the physics at the present. Physical limits cannot be bypassed by theoretical future promises. The chronological data is relentless. AI's energy and water footprints are on track to double by 2030, reaching the absolute power demands of entire industrialized nations.
It is a massive scale.
And this infrastructure is not existing in a vacuum. It is directly competing with human needs, it is draining drought-stricken aquifers, and it is forcing obsolete fossil fuel peaker plants to stay open today. The environmental cost of AI is a physical reality right now. It is measured in actual tons of carbon and millions of liters of evaporated water. It is not a software bug that can be patched with a technological update in the 2030s.
Which really brings us back to where we started. For the longest time, we have had the luxury of thinking about the digital world as a purely abstract space, a weightless cloud.
But the cloud is a machine, a vast, heavy, incredibly power-hungry physical machine that is intricately tied to the Earth's finite resources.
And recognizing that intersection, seeing the millions of miles of wires, the millions of gallons of water, and the massive gigawatts of power behind every algorithmic response is going to be the defining challenge of the next decade of human development.
Because you simply cannot optimize the future if you don't acknowledge the physical reality of the present.
Well said. Thank you for listening. Do not forget to click like and subscribe and write your opinion in the comment section.